He had always been fascinated by the unknown, and when the opportunity came to purchase an alien, he didn't hesitate. The auction was unlike any other, filled with strange beings from distant planets. He'd been warned by some to stay away, but the curiosity within him was too strong to ignore. Among the various alien species being sold, one stood out. She was a mute alien with no voice to speak of. She was small, with a delicate frame, her skin a shade of blue that shimmered under the auction lights. The seller claimed she was a perfect servant, silent, obedient, and docile. The man, eager to get a bargain, quickly placed his bid. For just pennies, he had won her. He was excited and intrigued by the idea of owning a creature from another world, one who was supposed to be mute, obedient, and easy to control. It was too good of a deal to pass up. As he stood there, holding the contract in his hands, he couldn't help but notice the fear in her eyes. She never spoke, but her gaze spoke volumes. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, as though she was expecting something to happen. The man didn't think much of it at first. After all, she was just an alien slave. What could be so unusual about a mute being? He made his way to her cage, his footsteps echoing in the quiet room. The alien stood up slowly, her head down, eyes still avoiding his. She didn't make a sound, not even a breath. The man found it strange. She was supposed to be obedient, but she seemed different. Still, he dismissed the thoughts as mere curiosity. "Come with me," he ordered, not expecting any response. She hesitated for a moment and then, without a word, followed him out of the auction house. The silence between them felt strange, almost heavy, but the man assumed it was just the nature of the creature he had purchased. The journey back to his home was quiet. The alien didn't make a single noise as she sat next to him in the car, her face expressionless. He tried to talk to her, but she simply ignored him. For some reason, this only made him more interested in her. What was it like to be so silent? She seemed like a mystery, one he was eager to unravel. When they arrived at his house, he unlocked the door and motioned for her to enter. She didn't resist, but glanced nervously around, her eyes flickering to the shadows in the corners of the room. The man found this odd, but he shrugged it off. "You're safe here," he said, trying to reassure her, though he wasn't sure why. She didn't answer, still standing in the doorway, her body rigid. The man grew impatient. He had bought her, and now he wanted to make her useful. He moved toward her, intending to guide her to the kitchen where he would show her what to do. But just as his hand reached out to touch her arm, something strange happened. The air around them seemed to grow colder, and for the first time, he felt a sense of unease. The alien's eyes locked onto his, wide and full of fear. She didn't make a sound, but it was clear. She was trying to warn him of something. He ignored the warning, thinking it was just part of her alien nature. But little did he know, this was only the beginning of a much darker and more dangerous journey. As he reached out to her, she shuddered violently, and in that moment, the man heard a faint voice in his mind. "Run!" But the voice was not hers. The message was clear, and it sent a chill down his spine. What had he really bought? The man stood frozen for a moment, his hand still hovering near the alien's arm. The words echoed in his mind. Run. But where had they come from? He quickly glanced at the alien, her eyes wide, her body stiff with fear. She hadn't spoken, but it was as though the warning had been directly transmitted into his thoughts. His heart raced, but he shook it off. Maybe it was just his imagination, the result of a long day. He reached out again, this time with more determination. She flinched, stepping back slightly, her body trembling as if she were on the edge of breaking down. For a split second, he wondered if she had been abused in the past, or if her silence was a sign of trauma. But that only fueled his curiosity more. He was intrigued by her strange, eerie silence and the fear that radiated from her. The man pulled out a chair and sat down, trying to calm himself. "Relax," he muttered, his voice more for his own benefit than hers. "You're safe now. I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't respond. She simply stood there, her posture rigid, her eyes darting around the room as though searching for an escape. The man watched her for a while, trying to read her, trying to understand what was going on in that silent, fearful mind. The longer he watched, the more uneasy he became. There was something off about her, something that didn't fit the picture of the docile, obedient servant he had imagined. She wasn't just a mute slave. There was something more to her, something he hadn't accounted for. Minutes passed, and the man grew impatient. "What are you waiting for?" he asked, half annoyed, half curious. Still no answer came. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then, unexpectedly, her eyes locked onto his again, and for the first time, he felt the weight of her gaze. She was looking at him, but it wasn't the look of someone who had accepted their fate. No, it was the look of someone who was desperate, someone who was begging for help without uttering a word. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the fear, and a silent plea for escape. Suddenly, there was a faint sound, barely perceptible, like a whisper in the air. The man's heart skipped a beat. He stood up quickly, scanning the room. The alien's eyes widened, and she seemed to grow more tense. Something was wrong. He rushed to the window, pulling the curtain aside to peer outside. His eyes searched the street, the shadows growing longer as night began to fall. There was nothing out there, no sign of movement, no hint of danger. But then a flicker. A shadow moved just beyond his line of sight. He squinted, trying to make sense of what he had seen. His instincts kicked in, warning him of something he couldn't quite grasp. He turned back to the alien, who was now shaking, her eyes fixed on the same spot outside the window. Before he could say anything, the sound came again. This time it was louder, a faint scraping noise, like something dragging across the ground. The man's pulse quickened, and he knew something was coming. But what? And why was she so terrified? The alien's face grew pale, and she backed away, her body pressed against the wall. It was as if she had seen something in the shadows that he couldn't. "Tell me what's happening," he demanded, his voice shaking slightly, his earlier confidence faltering. But the alien remained silent, her body trembling uncontrollably. He felt it now, a creeping sense of dread, an unease that filled the room like an oppressive force. He didn't know what was out there, but it was clear that he was no longer just dealing with a mute alien. He was dealing with something far more dangerous, something far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. And the worst part? He had no idea what he had truly brought into his life. As the scraping sound grew louder, the man realized with a chilling certainty that whatever was out there had found them. The scraping noise grew louder, sending a wave of panic through the man. His heart hammered against his chest, and his hands trembled slightly as he looked back at the alien. Her body was frozen, her eyes wide, staring into the distance as though she saw something he couldn't. She was no longer just an eerie figure standing in the room. Now she was a living, breathing mystery, a warning he had yet to fully understand. The man's instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet wouldn't move. His gaze was locked onto the alien, who had turned even paler, her breathing shallow. Her hands, once trembling, now gripped the edges of her arms as if trying to keep herself from falling apart. She was on the verge of breaking, her silent panic more telling than any words could be. Suddenly, without any warning, she bolted toward the back door. The man barely had time to react before she reached it, throwing herself against the wooden frame. She fumbled for the lock, her fingers slick with sweat, but her fear was paralyzing. The man snapped out of his daze and rushed to her side. "Wait, stop!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. But it was too late. With one last desperate push, the alien managed to unlock the door and throw it open, stepping outside. He followed, calling after her, but she was already running, her feet pounding against the ground as if something or someone was chasing her. The man hesitated, torn between going after her and staying inside, where it felt safer. But the look on her face had been enough. Whatever had caused her to flee, it wasn't something that could be ignored. He followed her into the night, the cold air biting at his skin as he raced to catch up. His mind was spinning. What had he gotten himself into? She wasn't just an alien slave. She was terrified, running from something far greater than him. But why? What had she been through? The questions flooded his mind, but none of them seemed to have answers. She darted through the alleyways, faster than he could keep up, her body moving with a precision and agility that seemed almost inhuman. He couldn't help but be impressed by her speed, but at the same time, the fear was overwhelming. The silence that surrounded them was unnerving, broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. As they rounded a corner, the man stopped, a strange feeling creeping up his spine. The air had grown thick, and the streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, twisted shadows. It was as if the city itself had become a maze, each turn more sinister than the last. Something was out there, something that neither of them could outrun. He heard it again, the scraping sound, louder now, closer. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just a noise, it was a warning. Whatever was hunting them was drawing nearer. The alien ahead of him stopped suddenly, her head snapping toward the sound. Her entire body tensed, her eyes wide with terror. She knew what was coming, and the man was beginning to realize that it was far worse than he could have imagined. She turned to face him, her mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, her eyes screamed at him, urging him to move, to run. But where? They were trapped, out in the open with no way to escape. And then, as if on cue, the shadows around them began to shift. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall and imposing, with eyes that glowed an eerie red. The man froze. He had seen enough to know that whatever stood before him was no ordinary enemy. The alien's warning had been clear, but it was too late to flee now. The hunt had begun. The figure in the shadows moved closer, its silhouette growing clearer with every step. The man's heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He could feel the alien's fear radiating off her, her eyes wide and locked onto the approaching threat. She wasn't just afraid. She was terrified, like someone running from a nightmare they could never escape. The man tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The creature before them was massive, easily 7 feet tall, with sharp, angular features that seemed almost alien, even in this world. Its eyes burned with a glowing red intensity, and its skin, if you could call it skin, was an unnatural shade of black, almost like the void itself. It moved with predatory grace, like a hunter who had already claimed its prey. "Who are you?" the man shouted, his voice barely above a whisper, the words lost in the tense silence that had settled around them. His pulse quickened as the creature took another step forward, its glowing eyes never leaving them. The alien slave beside him trembled, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The man could see the deep terror in her eyes now, and it only deepened his confusion. What was this thing? What did it want with her? And why had it followed them here? Without a word, the creature raised its hand. A low, guttural sound filled the air, like a growl from the depths of the earth. It wasn't speaking, at least not in a language the man could understand, but it didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough to send waves of fear crashing through him. The alien beside him instinctively took a step back, her body trembling violently as though every inch of her being wanted to flee. But there was nowhere to run. They were trapped. The man didn't know what to do. Should he try to fight this thing? He had no weapons, no knowledge of what they were up against. The fear in the alien's eyes was telling him that fighting would be futile. He needed to think, but the panic was clouding his thoughts, every instinct screaming at him to run, to get away from this impossible situation. But the alien was rooted to the spot, her body stiff, her head slightly bowed as if she was bracing for something even worse than the nightmare standing before them. The man looked at her, and for the first time he realized that this was more than just a slave. This was someone who had lived through horrors he couldn't even begin to imagine. And now he was tangled up in it. The creature took another step forward, closing the distance between them. The man's breath caught in his throat, his legs frozen in place, as though the fear had rooted him to the ground. The alien beside him raised her head, meeting his gaze for a moment, her silent plea clear. Run. But there was no time to think. The creature was too close now. With one swift motion, the creature reached out, its hand extending toward the man. The alien slave cried out in a silent scream, a terrible, desperate sound that tore through the air. The man didn't know if he should fight, flee, or somehow plead for mercy, but his instincts told him that the creature wouldn't be stopped by words. In a split second, everything changed. The alien slave lunged toward the creature, her actions so swift that the man barely had time to register what was happening. She stood in front of him, blocking his path, her body shaking violently as she faced the creature with an expression of fierce determination. "Run!" she mouthed, her eyes pleading with him. But it was too late. The creature's hand shot out like a snake, grabbing her by the arm and lifting her off the ground. The man could only watch in helpless horror as she struggled, her silent cries echoing in his mind as the creature dragged her away, its grip like iron. For a moment he stood there, frozen by the sheer shock of it all. But then something within him snapped. He couldn't just stand there. He couldn't let her suffer alone. With every ounce of his being, he ran toward them, desperate to save her. His hands reached out, trying to pull the creature away, but it was no use. The alien's grip was too strong and his strength too small. But he wasn't going to give up, not now, not when she had risked everything to warn him. The battle for survival had just begun. The man's pulse thundered in his ears as he reached desperately for the alien's arm, the creature's iron grip tightening around her like a vice. She had already been dragged several feet when he finally found his courage and lunged forward, pulling with all his strength. But it was futile. The creature barely flinched, its gaze cold and unyielding. Every part of him screamed to do something, anything to save her, but he was powerless against this monstrous being. The alien slave's body was limp, her face twisted in agony. Her legs kicked helplessly in the air as she struggled to break free. Her eyes met his once more, but this time there was no fear, only a quiet, resigned acceptance. She knew the creature's power. She had been running from it for a reason. And now, with him involved, there was no escaping it. The man's chest tightened as a cold realization hit him. This was no ordinary threat. This wasn't just an alien creature. It was something far more dangerous, something that had hunted her for a long time. And now he was caught in its web, as helpless as she had been. The creature turned its head slowly toward him, its glowing eyes narrowing in what could only be described as a predatory gaze. The man's heart skipped a beat. He could feel the weight of those eyes on him, the suffocating pressure of its gaze. It wasn't just a monster, it was a hunter, and they were its prey. "Let her go!" the man shouted, his voice raw with panic. But the creature did not respond. It didn't need to. With a low guttural growl, it yanked the alien slave's body up higher, tightening its grip around her throat. The man could hear her struggling to breathe, her chest heaving as she fought for air. For a moment, he froze, caught between the need to run and the desperation to save her. But then, something within him snapped. He couldn't run. He couldn't leave her. Not after everything she had done to warn him. The words she had silently begged him to hear, run, had been meant for her own safety. But now, it was his turn to make a choice. He wasn't going to let her be taken without a fight. He reached into his jacket pocket, his fingers trembling as he searched for anything that might give him a chance to fight back. His hand brushed against a small metal object. A keychain, nothing more. But in that moment, it felt like a lifeline. With a surge of adrenaline, he drew the keychain out and held it in front of him, praying it would work. The creature's eyes flickered briefly, as if sensing the shift in energy. For just a split second, it seemed to hesitate. But that hesitation was enough. The man lunged forward, using every ounce of strength he had left. He slammed the metal object against the creature's hand, and there was a sharp, echoing crack. The creature howled in pain, its grip loosening just enough for the alien to break free. Without thinking, the man grabbed her, pulling her toward him with all his strength. She collapsed into his arms, gasping for air, but there was no time to rest. The creature was already recovering, its eyes blazing with fury. "Run!" the alien slave whispered urgently, her voice barely audible. The man didn't need to be told twice. He turned and sprinted, pulling her along with him. His legs burning as he ran faster than he ever had before. They rounded a corner and stumbled into an alleyway, the sounds of the creature's pursuit growing louder behind them. He didn't know how much longer they could keep running, but there was no stopping now. The only option left was to keep moving, to keep going until they could find a way to escape. But as the creature's steps grew closer, the man realized something. He wasn't just running from the monster behind him. He was running from the truth that whatever had brought them here, whatever danger was chasing them, wasn't something they could outrun. Not without a fight. And he was beginning to realize that if they were going to survive, they would have to face whatever awaited them head on. And so, they ran into the unknown. The alley seemed to stretch endlessly before them, a labyrinth of shadows and cracked pavement, but the man didn't dare slow down. His lungs burned, his legs felt like lead, but the sound of the creature's heavy footsteps behind them pushed him forward. Every corner, every turn seemed to offer no escape, and yet the alien slave clung to him, urging him to run faster. She was struggling to keep up, her breathing shallow. But there was a fire in her eyes, one that matched his determination. He glanced over his shoulder once, just for a split second, and caught a glimpse of the creature, a monstrous figure, tall and imposing, moving through the alley with a terrifying speed. It was closing in, and he could feel its presence looming, its gaze piercing the back of his skull. Ahead, the alley opened up into a wider street, illuminated by a flickering streetlight. The man's mind raced. They couldn't stop. There was nowhere to hide. But just as they reached the street, the alien slave suddenly pulled him to a halt. "Wait," she whispered, her voice weak but urgent. He barely had time to register her words before she pushed him toward a nearby door, the faded numbers on it barely visible in the dim light. Without question, he shoved the door open, and they stumbled inside. The man slammed it behind them, locking it with shaking hands. They were inside a dilapidated building, a warehouse by the looks of it. Dust filled the air, and the scent of old wood and rusted metal made him choke. But it was shelter, however temporary, and the man collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. The alien slave, her breathing ragged, sank to her knees beside him. The fear in her eyes had not subsided, but there was something else now. A sense of urgency, a kind of silent desperation that filled the room with a heavy silence. She motioned for him to stay quiet, her eyes darting to the cracks in the walls and the small, broken windows. They could hear the creature now, its movements outside the building slow and deliberate, as if it was searching for something, them. The man's heart thudded in his chest, and he felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. He didn't know how much longer they could remain hidden. The creature would find them. It always did. The alien slave glanced at him, her hand trembling as it reached for his. She held it firmly, but there was a sadness in her eyes. She was resigned to something, as though she knew this moment would come, knew it was only a matter of time before they were caught. "We need to move," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with conviction. "Now!" The man's pulse quickened. What had she meant? What was she saying? Her gaze locked onto his once more, and the answer was clear. The time to run was over. They couldn't keep fleeing. It was time to face the creature. They had to fight back, or they wouldn't make it out alive. With a final glance at the door, the man nodded. There was no turning back now. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it with her, because running would only bring them back to the same nightmare. It was time to take a stand. The warehouse felt suffocating, the silence broken only by their ragged breaths. The alien slave's hand was still tightly gripping his, and the man could feel the weight of her fear pressing against him. He had never felt so out of his depth, so completely powerless. But as they both stood there, staring at the locked door, a new sense of resolve began to form inside him. They couldn't keep running. Not anymore. The creature outside was relentless, and the man knew it was only a matter of time before it found them. He could almost feel its presence, a dark force creeping closer with every passing second. The alien slave, however, was staring at the shadows around them, her gaze locked onto something that he couldn't see. It was as if she had already made peace with what was coming, but the man hadn't. He wasn't ready to surrender, not yet. "We can't let it find us," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. He didn't know what he was expecting, but he certainly didn't expect the alien's response. "Not just find us," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. "It wants more. It's here for me, and now it will take you too." Her words sent a chill down his spine. He had never imagined that this creature was anything more than a hunter, a being chasing down its prey. But now it seemed that there was a much darker reason for its pursuit. The alien slave was more than just a fugitive. She was the key to something much bigger, something dangerous. Before he could ask her what she meant, the sound of footsteps echoed outside the warehouse, slow and deliberate. His heart skipped a beat. The creature was close. He could hear it circling, its steps like heavy thunder, each one drawing closer, as if it was savoring the moment before it would strike. The alien slave didn't move. She remained perfectly still, her body tense, but there was no panic in her eyes now. Only a quiet acceptance. "We don't have time," she said, standing up slowly. "Get to the back of the warehouse. There's a hidden door. I can't make it without your help." The man hesitated for just a moment, his mind spinning. What was she asking of him? He was just a human. A man who had made a terrible decision by purchasing her, not understanding the dangers that had come with it. But now, in this moment, he knew she was right. If they were going to survive, they had to move, fast. There was no way out without fighting back, without confronting whatever nightmare was hunting them. With one last look at her, he nodded. "Lead the way," she turned, her movements swift and purposeful. As she made her way to the far corner of the warehouse, the man followed, his eyes constantly darting to the door. He could hear the creature, its breathing now just outside the entrance, its presence almost tangible. The hidden door she spoke of was in the back corner, half concealed by a pile of old crates. She pulled it open with ease, revealing a dark tunnel leading deep underground. There was no light, no sound, only the promise of escape. Or more danger. But this was their only chance. As he followed her into the darkness, the man's mind raced. What was waiting for them? What had they unleashed by running? And most importantly, could they survive long enough to face whatever was ahead? There was no turning back now.